It's Wednesday Addams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday, Season 2, begins August 6th, only on Netflix.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals participating in the show. All persons described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions along with adult language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
In late August of 2013, a mother receives a phone call from her son stating that he was coming home from college. His behavior before this date was weird at best. He pulls over to take a nap because he's just too tired to finish the drive. He is never seen again. You're listening to the Mysterious Brews podcast, and tonight we bring you the case of Brian Laspisa.
Bryce Laspisa's journey began in Chico. Last Wednesday night, he said goodbye to his girlfriend, Chico State student Kim Sly.
He was leaving my house, and I thought that he was going to his apartment in Rockland.
But he didn't drive back to Rockland, where he is a student at Sierra College. For whatever reason, the 19-year-old kept driving. Bryce called his mother and told her he was coming home to Laguna Niguel.
I have thought about every possible scenario of...
Welcome to a deep, dark, dank, moist basement somewhere in the bowels of Georgia. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is hot, hot, hot. Heat indices this week is going to be in the 110 to 115 range. Coach and I are getting ready to go back to school. Everybody's running around like their heads are cut off. So tonight you get me. We'll welcome new patrons Shannon Lee, Sarah Clark, and the artist known as Jane. If you have not been following the Crystal Rogers case, there was some great news out of the great state of Kentucky. They found Mr. Houck. Guilty. So great day. If you've not seen the video, it's on Instagram as well as TikTok, I believe. Crystal's mother comes back to Bardstown with a police escort, and the streets are packed with supporters, well-wishers, and our hearts go out to her. Hopefully, the other cases in Bardstown start to be solved as well. There's a good interview with the current police chief there, and he hinted around that they are just waiting to drop the hammer on some things. So good news coming out of Bardstown. So tonight we are bringing you the case of Bryce Laspisa. Around the middle of August 2013 in Laguna Niguel, California, Mike and Karen Laspisa helped their only son and only child, 19-year-old Bryce, pack up for his return to Sierra College in Rockland, California. Bryce had just spent the summer at home and was looking to get started on his sophomore year of college. Once the car was packed with all of his things, the three of them made the 7-hour drive north to his apartment. Once his parents had helped him get everything moved in, they gave him a hug and a kiss and wished him luck. Then they turned around and headed back home. Mike and Karen talked about how well Bryce was doing at school and how much he seemed to love the program he was in. which was the graphic design program. Bryce was a very gifted and talented artist who had lots of friends. He had a wonderful girlfriend, and it seemed as if he was living his best life. He was well on the path to success. Just a couple of days after getting dropped off at school by Bryce's parents, Bryce's very close friend and roommate Sean, along with Bryce's girlfriend Kim, noticed Bryce was acting unpredictably. More specifically, he was drinking a lot of hard liquor. Bryce was no saint. He liked to drink and party like most college kids his age, but the amount of alcohol he was consuming was concerning. It was also during this time that Bryce began experimenting with a drug called Vyvanse. Now, Vyvanse is a very powerful stimulant that's usually prescribed to people with ADD. Bryce, on the other hand, he did not have ADD, and he was taking Vyvanse in order to stay up late and play video games. Between the copious amounts of alcohol and the drug Vyvanse, it appeared as if Bryce's personality was starting to change. He was becoming anxious and jumpy, kind of paranoid, and so finally Sean and Kim confronted him about his use/abuse of both the alcohol and Vyvanse. They sat him down and asked, "What's going on? What's causing you to act all scared and edgy, like a child?" Bryce told them that nothing was wrong and that he was fine. He explained that he was just drinking and doing whatever he wanted to do. He told them, quote, "It's not a big deal," end quote. Sean and Kim did not believe him, and they were convinced that something bad had happened to Bryce, and he was coping with whatever had happened by drinking very heavily and taking Vyvanse, not just when he was playing video games. So on August the 28th, 2013, about 2 weeks after Bryce had moved back into his apartment, he and his roommate Sean were alone in the apartment together, and at some point, as they're sitting there hanging out, Bryce says to Sean, "Hey, I want to give you something." And then he takes his diamond earrings out and gives them to Sean. And Sean's looking at him, looking at the earrings, kind of like, "What the hell, dude?" And he asked Bryce, "Didn't your mother give you these? Aren't they expensive and they're kind of important to you, aren't they not?" Bryce says, "Man, don't worry about it. I want you to have them." Sean would later state that he kind of looked at the earring, looked at Bryce, and wondered, this just doesn't make sense. Now, as Sean's wrestling with this gift of the earrings, Bryce turns around, grabs his Xbox, puts it on the table, and says, "I want you to have this too." Sean's like, "No, dude, I cannot take these things. These cost a lot of money. They're very valuable to you." And he asked Bryce, "Dude, what's going on?" Bryce says, "Sean, look, man, I want you to have these. You're important to me, and I want to give these to you." So Sean is just sitting there wondering what to do. As he's wrestling with this weird conversation that's just taken place, he says that Bryce pulls out his phone and begins aggressively texting someone. After a few minutes, Bryce looks up from his phone and tells Sean, quote, "Just so you know, I broke up with Kim," end quote. Sean knows immediately that something is definitely wrong. There's no reason Bryce would or should break up with Kim. They were a loving couple that doted on each other, and they were very close. Weird thing is that they had just seen each other earlier that day, and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary according to Sean. None of this is making sense. Plus, Bryce is now trying to give him these valuable personal items. Everything's just not jihad or adding up. So Sean makes the difficult decision. He's going to get in touch with Bryce's parents. Clearly, someone needs to talk some sense into Bryce and get to the bottom of whatever's going on with him. So Sean waits until Bryce leaves to go talk to Kim, and he immediately calls Bryce's parents. Bryce's mom, Karen, answers, and Sean tells her that Bryce is acting very weird. He is, in Sean's opinion, abusing drugs and alcohol. He reiterates that he would not be calling them unless he thought there was a serious problem. And I believe he tells Karen, "I'm not trying to get him in trouble. I just want you to speak with him and see if you can get out of him what's going on." Karen is floored at this phone call and this revelation and says she had no idea any of this was going on. She thanks Sean for calling and tells him that she will definitely call Bryce and speak with him. As soon as she hangs up the phone with Sean, Bryce actually calls her. Karen answers the phone, but the voice on the other end, it's not Bryce's. It's Kim's. She says, Karen, hey, I'm sorry just to call you like this, but your son just showed up at my apartment and he's acting very strange. So strange that I've taken his keys from him because I don't want him to drive. There's something wrong with him. I can't really describe what it is, but he seems totally off. Now, Mama Karen is really worried. And within about 5 minutes, not only has Bryce's roommate called and said that he's acting strange, but now his girlfriend / ex-girlfriend is telling her that Bryce is acting so strange that she's taking his keys away from him because she doesn't want him driving. Karen tells Kim to put Bryce on the phone. Kim hands the phone to Bryce and Bryce says, hey, Mom. Karen states that he seemed like his normal self. So she asked him, Bryce, what's going on? I'm hearing that you're acting a little weird. What are you doing at Kim's apartment? Bryce tells her, look, Mom, I just broke up with Kim. It's a very messy breakup. That's why she called you. She's upset. That's why I'm over here. We're talking about it and we're not getting anywhere. And I just really want to go home. I want to go back to my apartment, but she has my keys. Can you please tell her to give me my car keys back so I can leave? Karen's not buying it at all. But she says that if it had just been Kim calling, she would have believed Bryce's explanation. But the fact that Sean, his roommate, called, and I mean just called, basically saying the same thing that Kim told her, she's very suspicious. She tells Bryce, quote, I want you to just stay there. I'm going to fly out first thing in the morning. I'm going to come down, see what's what. And as she's explaining this, Bryce interrupts her and says, no, Mom, I have a lot to talk to you about. And until I can talk to you about it, I don't want you coming out here. Karen's like, what do you mean you have a lot to talk to me about? What is it that you have to talk to me about? I am now even more confused. Bryce refuses to elaborate over the phone, which strikes Karen as extremely odd because Bryce was always upfront and very blunt with his parents. And trust me, I've got one that is so blunt. Sometimes I'm like, dude, some things you just need to keep to yourself. But so Karen's spidey senses are tingling. So both Bryce's mom, Karen, and his dad state that the relationship they had with their son was very open and very honest. So for him to not even give a hint as to whatever it was that was going on seemed very odd and very cryptic. Karen gives up getting any more information out of Bryce and puts Mike, his father, on the phone. So Mike says, hey man, what's going on? Are you okay? Your mom tells me there's some sort of problem. Bryce tells Mike the same thing he just told Karen about the breakup and all that's going on, and there's no need to be concerned. And he tells Mike, I just need one of you to tell Kim to give me my keys back so I can go back to my apartment. I'm very tired. Mike is convinced from this conversation that Bryce is really fine, even though it did seem odd that two of his friends had just called saying he was acting weird. From Mike's assessment of the situation, Bryce seems perfectly fine in his opinion. Mike tells Karen, he seems fine to me. And so Mike tells Karen that they need to tell Kim to give him his keys back so that Bryce can go back to his apartment. Maybe he can get some rest and maybe he'll be a little bit more forthcoming. So he covers the receiver and looks at Karen and is like, look, we can talk to him about whatever is going on later. Let's just get him back to his apartment. So reluctantly, Karen gets back on the phone, tells Bryce to hand Kim the phone, which he does. And Karen tells Kim, would you mind giving Bryce his keys back? He'd like to leave. Kim says reluctantly, okay, I will, and hangs up the phone. Bryce leaves Kim's apartment around 11:30 p.m. that night. So as Bryce was in his car preparing to head back to his apartment, his mom calls him back. And she says, look, I want you to head back to your apartment, but as soon as you get there, please give me a call so I know that you're safe. Bryce says, no problem, Mom. I'll give you a call in about an hour and a half. So this is about 11:35. At 1 a.m., Bryce calls his mom back to let her know, hey, Mom, I'm back at my apartment. I'm safe and sound. Karen and Mike are relieved and tell Bryce, okay, we'll talk to you tomorrow morning. Fast forward about 10 hours from that phone call. So we're looking at about 11 a.m. on August 29th. Karen receives an automated phone call from her car insurance company letting her know that roadside assistance had been used on their 2003 Toyota Highlander. And that's Bryce's car. Karen's totally confused because the last time she talked to Bryce, he was at his apartment, safe and sound, about to go to bed. He did not have any car problems that he told her about. She's thinking maybe he got up early this morning and he got into an accident and called roadside assistance, or maybe last night he had car trouble and he just didn't tell her about it. Maybe it was just a minor fender bender, just something nonchalant. So she decides that she's going to call Bryce, and she does, but Bryce doesn't pick up. So she calls his roommate, Sean. Sean picks up, and Karen asks, hey, will you put Bryce on the phone? Sean's like, ma'am, Bryce is not here. He never came home last night. So now Karen and Mike are freaking out, extremely concerned. Their first thought is to call police because something awful has happened. Then they think, all right, hold on, let's pump the brakes. Let's wait a minute. And they have access to Bryce's bank statements because they had given him a credit card to use while he was away at school. So they log in and they start looking at any recent purchases that might tell them where he is or what he's doing. So when they pull up the statement, they find his most recent charge was only a few hours earlier at a car repair shop in Buttonwillow, California. Now, Buttonwillow is this kind of small desert town right off of I-5, roughly halfway between Bryce's school campus and his hometown of Laguna Niguel. So Karen and Mike assumed that last night Bryce must have decided to not go back to his apartment, but instead head home. She's thinking that he did say he had a lot to talk about, so maybe he was like, hell with it, I need to get this off my chest, and he's headed home so he can tell whatever's going on face to face. And perhaps he ran into some car problems in Buttonwillow. That must be the reason that there's a charge at an auto repair shop. It's the only thing that makes sense to them. Well, Karen calls the auto repair shop in Buttonwillow, and a man who works there named Christian answers the phone. Karen's like, I know you're going to think this is odd, but, explains kind of who she is, what's going on, and says, have you seen Bryce Laspisa? And explains what Bryce looks like, says, hey, he's got red hair, tattoo on his arm, driving a 2003 Toyota Highlander. Christian's like, yeah, we saw him a couple hours ago. We responded to a roadside assistance call. He ran out of gas on I-5. He said he was at a rest stop. We drove over to said rest stop, gave him some gas. Karen asked Christian, did my son say where he was going next? Christian said, nope, didn't say a word. We just gave him the gas and then we left. But if you'd like, I'd be more than happy to drive back to the rest stop to see if he's still there. It's only about 15 minutes from my shop. Karen and Mike are over the moon. They're extremely happy, and they thank Christian for the offer and ask Christian to please go check and call them back when he gets to the rest stop. So Christian hangs up, drives back to the rest stop, and surprisingly, he sees the 2003 Toyota Highlander with Bryce still sitting inside of it. And he's just sitting there, staring out of the front windshield into the abyss. Christian walks up to the car, gets Bryce's attention. Bryce kind of snaps out of this little stupor or fog that he's in, and he looks kind of surprised to see Christian again, and he's kind of rolling down the window, and Christian's like, hey, dude, I just talked to your parents. They're really concerned about you. And Christian takes out his phone, calls Karen, and he's like, yep, I'm looking right at him. He's right here. Same rest stop. Hold on. And he hands his phone to Bryce. Bryce says hello, and Karen's like, what are you doing just sitting at a rest stop? We are worried about you. Bryce doesn't have a good reason and tells Karen, I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here. Karen stops with the third degree and tells Bryce, just do me a favor, go fill up your car and come straight home, please. Bryce says, okay, I'll do that right now. Hands the phone back to Christian. Christian tells Karen, hey, looks like he's leaving now. I am glad I could help. Karen thanks him and hangs up. So as Christian is leaving, he looks over at Bryce and notices that Bryce, he's not going anywhere. He's not getting ready to leave. He's just kind of back in his little stupor, sitting there blankly staring out the front window. Christian kind of shrugs it off and thinks he just spoke with his mom. Surely he's about to leave. So Christian's like, I'm out of here. And he heads back to his shop. Now, the drive from Buttonwillow to Laguna Niguel is about a 3-hour trip. So Karen and Mike are expecting Bryce to be at their house between 3 and 3:30 p.m., which comes and goes. And Karen starts calling Bryce, but he's not answering his phone. And as much as Karen and Mike want to believe that he has gotten stuck in traffic, they knew deep down something was wrong. Something was off about Bryce's behavior, but they just didn't understand what it was. So for the next several hours, they continuously tried calling Bryce, still not answering the phone. So by 6 p.m., Bryce is not at their house, and he was still not answering the phone. Fed up with all of it, Karen and Mike call the police and file an official missing persons report. Police begin their search by contacting Bryce's cell phone provider, AT&T. They asked them to ping Bryce's phone. And so AT&T basically triangulates his phone off of the towers nearest to him and tell police where the phone is located. And the police and Bryce's parents are shocked at where it was. Bryce is still in Buttonwillow, or better yet, the phone is still in Buttonwillow, just a few miles down the road from the rest stop where Christian had last seen Bryce. More specifically, it was in a parking lot of a hotel. So police in Buttonwillow are alerted to the missing persons report about Bryce and the fact that his phone is apparently in the middle of this parking lot. So police in Buttonwillow, they head over to this parking lot to see if Bryce is there with his phone. And when they arrive at the hotel parking lot, they find Bryce's 2003 Toyota Highlander with Bryce sitting in the driver's seat, staring out the front window, right smack dab in the middle of the parking lot. So an officer walks up, knocks on the glass. Bryce rolls the window down. The officer would later state that Bryce acted totally normal and was extremely friendly. He was coherent, answered all of his questions. The officer even goes as far as to perform a field sobriety test on Bryce, which Bryce passes. He even tells the officer, hey, if you want to go ahead and search my car, go right ahead. He tells the police, I'm not doing anything but just sitting here. So the officer does a cursory search of the car and finds no drugs, no alcohol, nothing suspicious. When they asked him, son, what are you doing out here? Your parents are very concerned about you. Bryce tells them that he was just sitting there, but he was planning on heading home soon. So one of the officers on the scene tells him, you really need to call your mom. You need to call home and let them know you're okay. The officer says that instantly upon him saying this, Bryce becomes really anxious, almost like he did not want to call home. And the officer picked up on this change in his behavior and said, hey, you got to tell your family what's going on. They're the reason we're out here. They're concerned about you, so get your phone out, call your mother. Reluctantly, Bryce does that. The officer, upon Bryce calling Karen, says, give me the phone. So Bryce hands the phone to the officer, and as Karen is in the process of answering, the police officer just says, hey, Miss Laspisa, I'm with your son. He's just fine. He's sober. There's no drugs or alcohol on him in the car. I don't really know what he's doing, but he says he's going to go home pretty soon. There's nothing wrong about the situation that I can tell, but you need to talk to your son, and y'all need to figure out what's going on. The officer then hands the phone back to Bryce, and Karen asks Bryce, what is going on? What are you still doing in Buttonwillow? It's been almost 9 hours. Bryce didn't give her an answer to any of her questions. He kind of just deflected all of them and said that he'd be home soon and, hey, don't worry about it. I'm good. I'm just sitting here. There's nothing to worry about. So finally, Karen just stops trying to get information out of him. She could tell that yet again, he was not going to tell her anything about anything. So she changed her tactic. She tells Bryce, please just go get a bite to eat, get a cup of coffee, kind of get yourself together, and then please just drive home. It's only a few hours away. Drive home. We can talk about whatever problems you have, but you just got to drive home. You got to leave Buttonwillow and come home. Bryce tells his mom, you know what? Okay, I'll do that. I'm sorry. I'll be home in a few hours. And he hangs up. The officer was kind of eavesdropping on the whole conversation on purpose to make sure that everything was fine. And upon hearing all of this, he's satisfied that everything actually is fine. Bryce is sober, and for all intents and purposes, he should be heading home. The officer tells Bryce, good luck, son. Head home to your parents, and they leave the parking lot. So an hour later, Karen received a call from Christian, the car repair guy, who had checked on Bryce earlier at the rest stop. He had just got around to checking his voicemails and had seen where Karen had called him. And so he's just returning her call. But Christian's kind of invested now. He wants to check and see if Bryce had made it home. Karen tells Christian, no, he's not home. After you left him, he never left Buttonwillow. He's just down the road in a parking lot of a hotel. But the police had just left him, and they checked on him, and I'm positive Bryce is headed home now. Christian is all in now, and he tells Karen, quote, hey, I don't mind driving over there and just making sure that he has left the parking lot, end quote. Karen tells him, it's okay, you don't have to do that. I'm certain he's on his way home. Don't worry about it. You're too kind. You've done too much. After hanging up with Karen, Christian's like, nah, what the hell? Let's do it. So he heads over to the parking lot just to make sure Bryce really left, because evidently something's going on with this kid. So as Christian pulls into the lot, guess what he sees? Yep. Still in the middle of the lot is Bryce staring out the front windshield of his 2003 Toyota Highlander. Christian pulls up right next to him and parks, gets out of his truck, walks right up to the window, and this time he's a little less friendly and a little more, I got some tough love to give this kid. And again, Bryce kind of snaps out of this stupor that he's in, and he's shocked to see Christian again. So he rolls his window down, and Christian says to him, Bryce, you need to go home. Your parents are worried about you. You need to leave right now. And better yet, I'm going to watch you leave, and I'm going to follow you on the highway to make sure you're going home. Bryce was like, okay, and kind of shocked at how forceful Christian's being. So eventually Bryce is like, okay, man, yeah, all right, let's do this. Let's leave. So Christian gets back in his truck. And sure enough, he gets right behind Bryce and he follows him. A few seconds later, Bryce pulls out of the lot, starts heading towards the interstate. Christian would actually follow him for the next hour, heading toward Laguna Niguel. And at some point during this hour, Christian calls Karen and Mike. He tells them, hey, no, your son had not left the parking lot, but good news, he's headed on the highway towards your house right now, and better yet, I'm right behind him, and I've been so for about an hour. He should be home pretty soon. Confident that Bryce was fine and he was actually going home this time, Christian pulls up alongside Bryce, waves to him, and then he takes the next exit, turns around, heads back to Buttonwillow. So within a few minutes of Christian taking the exit to return home to his home, Karen calls Bryce, and this time he answers. Karen tells him, okay, You're going to have to start giving me landmarks of what you're seeing as you're driving so that I know that you're actually coming home. Bryce basically deflects again and refuses and says, I can't see anything out of my window. It's too dark. I don't know where everything is at. I'd have been like, just pull the fucking car over. I'll be right there. But hindsight's 20/20, and I'm sure they're beating themselves up about it. Bryce is not giving them anything. And around 2 a.m., when he should have already been home, or at the very least pulling into his parents' neighborhood, he tells Karen and Mike, I am too tired to continue driving. I need to pull over so I can get some rest. Karen and Mike valiantly attempt to get him to just push through and rest when he gets home, but realize that Bryce has now been awake for nearly 24 hours. It was the middle of the night, so it does not make any sense for him to risk it. And so they're like, okay, just pull over, take a nap. But as soon as you wake up, you call us. So we know you're back on the road. Bryce tells them, no problem, I'll do that. They hang up. So several hours later, which puts us around 8 a.m., Karen and Mike have still not heard from Bryce. And they're telling themselves, it's okay, everything's probably fine, he's probably still asleep. I mean, he was up for 24 hours, and that being awake for that long has worn him out. Surely he's fine. A few minutes pass, and they hear their doorbell ring. Immediately, they're relieved because they're thinking, Bryce is home, he's finally here. They run to the door, jerk the door open. They don't see Bryce. What they do see is a California highway patrolman. The officer asks them if they are the owners of a 2003 Toyota Highlander. Mike and Karen's heart sank. They tell the officer, yes, we do own a Toyota Highlander, but that is my son's car, and he was supposed to be driving home last night / early this morning. The officer tells them that the car has been located a few hours earlier at the bottom of a 25-foot cliff near Castaic Lake. The lake is actually halfway between Buttonwillow and Laguna Niguel. The officer tells Mike and Karen that there were no signs of a driver. They did locate 2 small drops of blood inside the vehicle, but beyond that, there was no indication that Bryce had sustained a life-threatening injury from the crash. And I think 1 drop of blood was on the driver's side headrest, and the other was near the rear of the car. Now, one of the back windows had been kicked out, kind of indicating that Bryce had got out of the vehicle that way. His laptop and his phone were still inside the vehicle. His wallet and a duffel bag were outside of the vehicle on the road and looked as if they had been rummaged through before they were just left there. After an examination of the damage to the car, the tire tracks that led down to where it had been found, and traffic cameras in the area, it was concluded that Bryce had purposely driven off that cliff. He had actually hit the accelerator right before he went over the edge. Now, Mike and Karen headed to the scene of the crash and spoke with some of the investigators that had been looking for Bryce. They informed them that most likely what they were looking at with this crash was a failed suicide attempt. Mike and Karen are just, they can't fathom it. They're not buying this explanation. That was not like their son. And just 2 weeks earlier, when they dropped him off, he was happy. He was excited to be back at school. He was talking about his future. He was not someone that was suicidal. The Laspisas wondered what situation could Bryce have possibly gotten himself into in just 2 weeks that was so bad it would lead him to do something like this. Mike and Karen, along with the investigators, wondered about the possibility that Bryce was hiding something. What had he meant when he said he had a lot to talk about? Did that have something to do with this whole situation? So a massive search was launched in and around the area where the car had been found. Hundreds of people on horseback, ATVs, on foot, in the air, via helicopters, all joined in the search. Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department actually put divers in the lake, Castaic, and they're looking for anything that can lead them to Bryce. So on the 9th day of this search, a bloodhound was brought in to see if it could pick up Bryce's scent. And sure enough, the dog alerted at the crash site, and the dog and the handlers and some of the investigators, they followed the dog, and the dog's following the scent trail all the way down to the lake. And then it gets down to the lake, and it kind of turns around the lake towards a bridge that was part of the dam that went across the lake. And the scent trail continues across this bridge to the other side and then up this small access road. And this small access road actually takes them to a truck stop. And it was at the truck stop that the scent abruptly stopped, which, if you've been looking at true crime, can mean one thing. Bryce got into some sort of vehicle. So authorities are like, okay, maybe this dog got confused with another scent, and this isn't really Bryce's scent. So they send the bloodhound and the handler back. They bring in a separate bloodhound and a new handler. Don't tell them anything. See if they could pick up a trail. Sure enough, this second bloodhound picks up Bryce's scent at the scene of the crash, and just like the first one, heads down to the lake, around to the bridge, over the bridge, up the access road, to the truck stop, and then boom, just stops. So after the scent trail was discovered, there was no other leads for authorities to follow, and so after about 3 weeks of looking everywhere for Bryce, they call off the search. Some people say Bryce was suicidal, and that's why he drove off this cliff that from the top of where he was at, when he headed down, it appears that the lake's like right over that cliff. And they theorized that he was indeed attempting a suicide or an attempted suicide. And despite the bloodhounds picking up his scent, Bryce was probably more than likely in that lake somewhere. A lot of people disagree with that and say that Bryce is still alive. That after this crash, he is able to get out of the car and he walks down to the lake, around the bridge, goes up to the truck stop, kind of hitches a ride with someone and vanishes. And now other people think that all of that happened, but he's living off grid somewhere. Another theory is that Bryce's drug and alcohol use caused a psychotic break, and that was what was causing all of his strange behavior that day. That's what led him to drive off the cliff, and perhaps when he landed, he sustained a nasty head wound that caused him to forget who he was, kind of like a concussion. And that now Bryce is kind of just wandering around somewhere, not knowing who he is or not knowing that he is a missing person. Now, as for his parents, Karen and Mike, they say he would never do any of that on purpose. He would never cause this much pain to the people that love him, and so he must have been a victim of foul play. Regardless of what you believe happened to Bryce Laspisa, something definitely happened, and more than likely it is connected to whatever it was he said he needed to talk to his mom about. That thing that he couldn't discuss on the phone. Whatever it was that he was potentially trying to drive home to talk to his mom and dad about in person is what caused all of this. And unless they find Bryce Laspisa alive, we may never know what that reason was. Since August 30th of 2013, when Bryce went missing, no one has heard from him and no one has seen him. His bank records have been quiet. So if you think you have any information about Bryce Laspisa's whereabouts, please call 323-890-5550 or visit wehelpthemissing.com. Bryce's parents, along with the searchers and the investigators, are still looking for him, so any information could help break this case wide open. Personally, I really don't have a good theory about what happened to Bryce. I will say this is probably one of the most difficult cases that I've had to do as a parent. because my son is 6 hours away at school and he's driving home. And when he first started coming home, he would take, 8-9 hours to make a 6-hour trip. He was stressing me and my wife out. And when I started researching this case, I was like, I don't know if I can get through this. I don't know if we can even do this, because it just hit a little too close to home. Good news for my son is he just doesn't give a shit. And he's like, I just drive. And when I get bored, I just pull over and give me something to drink, check my social media, walk around a little bit, get back in the truck and do it again. So, but again, I mean, it's just, you never know. And I think that's the worst part of this whole thing. There is on the TV show Disappeared, I think it's season 7, episode 3. And in the wonderful world of editing, yes, it is. Episode 3, season 7. The title is Road to Nowhere. It first aired on April 24th, 2016. And there's a lot more information that I couldn't get to. Kind of gives you a little bit more into what was going on, and kind of, they talked to not only Karen and Mike, but they talked to the chief investigator for LA County. And, hats off to that investigator. He did a phenomenal job. I felt like after watching that episode that he treated that case, or Bryce's case, like Bryce was his son. And that's what you want from authorities, So again, this one hit a little too close to home, but, and it just breaks my heart for his parents and the not knowing. So again, if you know anything about Bryce Laspisa, his whereabouts, what could have been bothering him, you can stay anonymous. Just call that number or go to that website, wehelpthemissing.com. And that number again is 323-890-5550. So recommendation this week, if you're looking for something new to binge, head on over to Netflix. It's called Department Q. It's a crime drama. It's so good the Mrs. likes it. Don't want to give too much away on that one, but again, Department Q on the Netflix. Ladies and gents, this heat wave that's about to hit, y'all be careful out there. It's awful, especially if you work outside. My hat's off to you. So, there ain't nothing much else to say except deuces.